Hey guys, it's Madison Estes. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about horror trends and predictions for 2025. Now I do a video like this every year, essentially where I just go over, horror movies, TV shows, and books and the trends that I've noticed in the last couple of years and what I predict we're going to be seeing this year. I am going to be focusing mostly on horror movies this time because I feel like that is where the trends are most obvious. The first trend I want to talk about is the to be continued trend. This is a trend I've noticed. The best way I can describe it is whenever a movie basically flat out tells you that there will be a sequel or that a sequel is already in the works. I noticed it specifically in The First Omen. I feel like that was the most glaringly obvious example, but it was also at the end of The Strangers Chapter 1. And to some extent, in the movie All My Friends Are Dead, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, how they have at the end of several movies, they're like, Star-Lord will return, or Doctor Strange will return. So it kind of feels like that. At the end of The First Omen, it really felt like they were saying, these characters will return in the next installment. I'm not very fond of it because I feel like what makes horror so exciting is not knowing what's going to happen next. And I'm also not a fan of creating a film with the implication that there's already going to be a sequel as the ending, because what if your film bombs? I do think The First Omen did very well, and maybe they had very high hopes and high expectations, but if it hadn't done that well, the ending would have been a super big letdown because it would have been promising a film that they weren't going to deliver. I think that it's one way of just trying to get people to stay invested or trying to get them back in the theaters by promising that there's going to be another installment. But I'm not really sure that this is the best way to get people to stay invested. I honestly think that just making a really good film, even if it seems like it's going to be a standalone, is probably the best way to get people invested in your horror series. And I also think this might be related to the trend I mentioned last year about horror trilogies, how after the Halloween trilogy, there's been lots of things that were pitched as trilogies. The Exorcist trilogy, the Strangers trilogy. I just found out that Welcome to Derry was pitched as having 3 seasons, and each season they're going to focus on a new incident in Derry. So yeah, I think that the horror trilogy trend is still here, it's still going, and I think that it's related to that to be continued trend, this idea that a franchise is just almost a guarantee at any point as long as something is somewhat successful. The next trend I want to talk about is influencers. Now, I feel like influencers as a subject matter has appeared in several horror films in the last couple years. Just off the top of my head, hashtag All My Friends Are Dead had several characters that were influencers. Clickbait Unfollowed was about a bunch of influencers competing with each other for a grand prize in sort of a Squid Game style competition. Amp House Massacre was about a influencer that died, and then like a year later, all the people that were living in this house that were all influencers in some kind of weird, almost like reality TV show kind of thing, start getting murdered one by one. And even in films like Festival of the Dead and You Shouldn't Have Let Me In, which weren't about influencers, there was still that influencer character, that character that's taking pictures of everything and posting on social media, even whenever things are really bad. Like in Festival of the Dead, one of the characters breaks her leg and she's trapped in a car and her friends go to get help and she's like posting on social media updates about what's going on with her. I'm not sure why this is so trendy. In terms of wanting to create an entire movie about influencers and content creators, I can definitely understand the appeal for that, but I don't know why whenever you have any kind of random film, one was about zombies, one was about vampires, let's just throw an influencer character in there to watch her get horribly murdered. It kind of feels like it's just a cheap way to show, hey, this character's really conceited. So I'm okay with this trend, but I'd like to start seeing it be subverted. I felt like a little bit of that happened at the end of Clickbait Unfollowed, where you saw like the human side of some of these influencers, and you saw like the reason that they put up a facade, because they all kind of were bullshitting on their social media a little bit. So I'd like to see more of that. I'd like to see more of like influencers either showing their real selves or maybe like subverting expectations, and the influencer character is like the nicest person in the movie. I'd like to see defying the stereotypes, basically, because I'm like I said, I'm not against this trend. I just feel like it's starting to get a little bit old, and I'd like to see it revamped if it's going to continue. Okay, the next trend I want to talk about is one that I touched on last year. I think that I called it like childhood characters or childhood IP being turned into horror movies. And I've noticed, even to get even more specific than that, it seems like it's childhood fairy tale characters being turned into horror icons. So we've got Winnie the Pooh, we've got Mickey Mouse, we've got Bambi, and we've got Peter Pan, all of which have been horror movies or will be horror movies this year. As I said last year, it doesn't look like we're going to be getting a good one anytime soon, but I am hopeful that it could happen. Whenever I was a kid, there was something called fairy tale theater that scared the shit out of me, and it had adaptations of like Sleeping Beauty and Snow White and Beauty and the Beast, and it was just really scary, probably because I was a kid. Like, it's not really that scary as an adult. But I feel like a lot of these stories are just intrinsically very frightening. And I feel like if it was done really well by someone that took the material very seriously and wanted to put a lot of effort into making it creative and adding some things that are truly horrifying, not just like your stereotypical serial killer slasher film, but actually made it horrifying with body horror. Because think about it, a lot of these stories have like magical elements and evil witches and things like that. You could do a lot of really interesting things with dark fairy tales. I feel like this trend is definitely here to stay. There's going to be even more coming out next year. But I feel like we could get a really good one at some point. So fingers crossed somebody decides to take a serious approach to one of these childhood characters and tries to make them truly horrifying, because I think that that could be super successful. The next trend I want to talk about is overprotective parenting. There's two films that came out last year that I feel like really illustrate this trend very well, and that is Never Let Go with Halle Berry and Hold Your Breath with Sarah Paulson. In both films, the mother is trying to protect her children, and she goes to really crazy lengths to try to do that. And also in both films, it's ambiguous as to whether or not the parent was truly aware of some kind of danger and truly trying to protect her kids, or if she just kind of went a little cray-cray. Kind of makes me think a little bit about all of the things I've seen on the news, which I try very hard to avoid, but somehow it finds me, about people, wanting to ban books and like entire libraries getting shut down because the parents are angry. They don't like the content that's in the book, so they have to ban everything. So just something to think about. I always think it's really interesting whenever I see something in the news and then I see something in horror films, like a trend, and wonder if there's some kind of connection. To me, that's kind of what makes these videos fun, is to think about things like that. So I'm going to mention one more trend that I also mentioned in my video last year because it was just so prevalent last year. It was everywhere. I think it was probably the biggest trend of 2024, and that is birth and pregnancy horror. Going back for a second to what I just said about real-life events influencing horror films, I definitely think that Roe v. Wade being overturned has led to so much discussion about abortion, and even people in other countries are hearing it nonstop in the media and news. So I definitely think that that's one reason why we keep getting these birth and pregnancy horror films, because it's just in the public consciousness right now. Last year alone, we had Immaculate, The First Omen, Azrael, Alien Romulus, and Beetlejuice, which was a little bit surprising. That's just off the top of my head. I'm sure there was probably more, especially if you start getting into like the real independent horror films. I know that there were more. So it's definitely a trend that is still exploding right now, and I foresee that it's going to continue for quite some time. The next trend I want to talk about is twisted romance horror. So last year we had Lisa Frankenstein, which was a really cute story about a girl that falls in love with a reanimated corpse. And we also had Nosferatu, which was about unrequited love. And this year, just looking at some of the trailers and some of the news about films that are coming out next year, we're going to have Companion at the beginning of the year. We're going to have Dracula, A Love Story. We're going to have Heart Eyes, which is about a serial killer that goes around murdering couples on Valentine's Day. So I definitely think that twisted romance, or, horror films that have romance as a very strong subplot at least, are going to be pretty popular. The next trend I want to talk about is family men who have a dark secret. And usually it's a murdery secret. So a few examples: Don't Move, Speak No Evil, and Trap were all about family men that had dark secrets. Often we would get to see this dark side of this character, and then we see the act that this character puts on for the world in order to get people to not find them suspicious. Andrew in Don't Move did a really good job of sort of talking to the cop and trying to convince him, oh, this is my wife and she's drunk, we just lost our baby, etc., etc. And then, a few minutes later, he's like calling his actual wife and he's like, yeah, honey, everything's going great, while he has a woman in his car that is paralyzed that he's intending to kill that night. This trend is just one that I noticed last year. I don't know if it's going to continue this year because I didn't see any films that just jumped out at me and made me think, okay, this trend is going to definitely be in this film. But it's just one I noticed, and, I'm for it. I think it's interesting, and I think that, it's showing us something that happens in real life all the time. The next 3 trends I'm going to go over are trends that I am not a fan of. I'm a little bit more open-minded about the next one I'm going to talk about, but the last 2, oh man, I'm so done with those. The next trend I want to talk about is smart houses. We have gotten so many movies about smart houses, and it looks like the trend is going to continue this year. Last year we had Romy, which was one of the worst movies that I watched last year. Oh my god, it was so bad. It was literally a whole film about a girl calling her mom, being like, can I come home now? I don't like this smart house, even though it's like a $10 million home and it gives me everything that I want. It was just a really terrible film. And then Afraid, I heard it was awful, so I didn't even check it out. But yeah, it's just not a topic that has had a lot of good horror movies made about. And there was also a couple years ago the film Margot, which was actually the only decent smart house horror film I've ever seen. But even then, it's like, I feel like there still could have just been so many more original things that they could have done with it. And I'm just not a big fan of this trend because I feel like nobody's doing anything really original with it. Give me a smart house that's also haunted. Give me like an old Victorian mansion that they just updated and they added a bunch of technical stuff and oh, now we're seeing a bunch of ghosts and stuff in the smart house. Give me a story about like a couple that moves into a smart house and the husband starts acting weird, so the wife starts spying on him with the smart house, and then he realizes that she's spying on him and they get into a fight, and then he starts spying on her and she's starting to think maybe he's a serial killer or something. Like, just give us something that's more than a family or a couple moving into a smart house and then the house happens to be evil or stalkery and tries to ruin the relationships of the people in the house or tries to kill them. And this year, it looks like this is what Megan 2.0 is going to be. I'm not looking forward to that film. I thought the first one was fun. Didn't see that movie and think, oh yeah, this definitely needs a sequel. And if they were going to make it a sequel, I don't understand why they would turn it into like a smart house film. But that's what it seems like it's going to be. So we'll see if that's any good. I'm a little skeptical. And there's also another one coming out this year called Chipped. We'll see if either of those are good, or if they at least try to change the formula. I'll at least respect it if they try to do something innovative with this trope. But overall, I'm just not a big fan of this trend. This next trend, I am very passionately not a fan of, and that is putting little to no dialogue in your film. Yes, I understand there are art house films that probably do this very well. I don't know, because that's not really my wheelhouse. But I just feel like, for the most part, there are almost no really good modern horror films that are silent films. And the ones that I have seen, I remember thinking, this probably would have been better if they'd added a little bit of dialogue. For instance, the film No One Will Save You. It's essentially about a woman who her house gets invaded by aliens, and it's just really one chase sequence after another until she starts fighting back, and she ends up killing some of them. And then there's also some flashback scenes to whenever she was a child because she's dealing with some childhood trauma. And that was kind of interesting, but I just remember thinking this would be so much better if there was like, maybe some internal dialogue, maybe some, internal narration going on so that we could like really hear her express her feelings. It felt kind of gimmicky, I'm not gonna lie. This is the one time I've seen a gimmicky, no dialogue film that actually turned out to be pretty good, but I still feel like it would have been better if they'd done dialogue. And I just wonder why they didn't. And I kind of feel like it's a marketing thing. I feel like if we can talk about how we managed to make a great film without using any dialogue, people are going to be curious and they're going to want to see it. And while I'm on this topic, I want to talk a little bit about Azrael. Unlike No One Will Save You, which you're able to follow pretty well because it's a very simple storyline, in Azrael there's like a cult that supposedly they cut their tongues out, and that's why nobody speaks, because there's these monsters that can hear them. And so the cult believes that if you don't talk, then you'll be saved. But like they still make noises and stuff to draw the monsters to them. But apparently they were only doing that because they were trying to punish these people for trying to escape the cult. I didn't get any of that from the movie. I had to go online and Google it. I was like, who are these people? What is happening? I have no context at all. I have no idea what's going on. I don't think it added anything to the film. That's my point. If it really added something, I would be like, okay, maybe it's just not my kind of film. But I don't feel like it did. I felt like they could have had flashbacks which showed the couple joining the cult, where they did have dialogue, could have slowly shown the world descending into chaos as the monsters took over, and like it could have shown the scene where they all decide to cut off their tongues, which would have been amazing. I think that would have probably been the best scene in the whole movie if they'd included that. It just seems like so many missed opportunities to really develop the characters and make you care about them. So I wasn't a big fan of that film, and I'm not a big fan of this trend either. The last trend I want to talk about is also my most hated, and it strongly relates to the one I just talked about. And that is the trend of using a filmmaking technique as a gimmick to market your film. So, for instance, I already mentioned Azrael. They did so many interviews about how they didn't have any dialogue in the film. Ironically, they talked about that a lot. They just didn't talk in the film. And then, you know, there was Mads, which came out last year, which I actually thought Mads was okay. I at least think it was interesting. But what I didn't love is that nobody talks about that film without talking about the fact that it was a oneer. So apparently they filmed the entire movie in one take. And yeah, that is an accomplishment, I guess. But I personally didn't feel like it was necessary. There was actually a couple times when I was watching the movie where I was like, I kind of wish it would slow down for just a minute and have the characters talk and like develop them, you know, like what does this guy even do for a living? What are his dreams and aspirations? Does he have a girlfriend? I do feel like they kind of tried to start developing the first character, but for those of you that haven't seen it, it does hop from character to character at some point in the film. And you don't connect with any of these characters. You're kind of just like, I don't know, for me, I was kind of just waiting for the film to be over. I was like, I want to see what everybody's talking about. I want to see what, you know, why is this so exciting? And I understand now that people liked it because of that non-stop pacing, because it literally feels like you're watching a GoPro. I do think that Mads had one of the best openings I've seen in a very long time, and that might be one of the reasons people were so excited about the film. But I do, like I said, I think that there was so much emphasis on the oneer, oh, it's so brilliant, they did it all in one take. In general, I'm just not a fan of this trend of, you know, let's tell the audience how we filmed it and that we did something special with the techniques so that they'll watch our movie. Give me a good story, you know, just give me a good story, some good actors, and I'll be happy. You don't have to do the whole film in one take. You don't have to stand on your head while you're filming. You don't have to film the entire movie with Muppets, okay? You can just make a good horror film. So that is my list of horror trends and predictions for 2025. If you have any predictions of horror trends that you think we're going to see this year, please leave a comment below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and be sure to subscribe. On this channel, I post reviews, writing advice, horror commentary, and vlogs. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you later.